On a quiet morning, a fine mist drifted through the streets of an American town. No sirens, no warning signs, just air. Years later, one question refused to go away. What exactly did they breathe?
A secret government experiment that was carried out in St. Louis. Residents tell us they still remember a mysterious fog. Children would run through it, others would try to close their windows against it. For decades, they all had questions. Now, we're seeking answers. The United States Army now admits that it sprayed a chemical that contained cadmium, a known carcinogen, on a neighborhood of more than 10,000 people. Critics say this was done with no warning and no consent.
This story takes place in the United States during the Cold War. The year was the early 1950s, a time when fear traveled faster than facts. The government was preparing for a possible chemical attack from abroad. What followed would later be described by official documents as a test. Why this matters now is simple, because the people involved were never asked, and many only learned decades later. In 1953, the U.S. Army approved a series of urban tests to study how chemical agents might spread through cities. The location chosen was St. Louis, Missouri, a working-class city near the Mississippi River. The operation was led by the Army Chemical Corps, working with civilian researchers. They released a powder into the air from rooftops, vehicles, and aircraft. At the time, officials said the material was harmless. Residents were not informed, and no consent was requested. Between 1953 and 1965, multiple releases took place. Each was documented internally but remained unknown to the public. Decades later, investigative journalists began asking questions. That is when the story changed. Army records later confirmed that zinc-cadmium sulfide was used as the dispersal material. According to the military, it was chosen because it glows under ultraviolet light. In 1994, the Department of Defense acknowledged the tests publicly for the first time. Officials stated the compound was believed to be safe at the time. However, cadmium is now classified as a toxic substance when inhaled over time. This classification came years after the tests ended. Independent scientists reviewed the exposure models and raised concerns. Some argued the concentration levels were higher than originally claimed. The U.S. Army has maintained that the tests caused no proven harm. They cite internal assessments and follow-up studies. Source: Army Review, 1999. Critics argue those studies were limited and relied on incomplete health data. Many residents had already moved or passed away by the time reviews occurred. There is no court ruling that definitively assigns blame. The gap between exposure and illness remains difficult to measure. For residents, the impact was not immediate or dramatic. There were no mass hospitalizations, no alarms. Instead, the harm, if any, was quiet. People lived their lives unaware they had been part of an experiment. Years later, families asked if unexplained illnesses had a cause. For many, there were no clear answers, only unanswered letters. Experts say this case sits at the intersection of science and ethics. Testing without consent, even for defense, crosses a moral line. One expert compared it to checking a smoke alarm by filling a house with smoke. You learn something, but the people inside never agreed. These tests influenced later laws on human research protections. They helped shape modern rules around consent and transparency. What remains unclear is the long-term human cost. Next comes the question of accountability. Some residents continue to push for expanded health studies. The likelihood of new federal investigations is medium. Legal action remains possible but faces time and evidence limits. The most realistic outcome is historical acknowledgment without liability. History does not always announce itself. Sometimes it drifts through the air and disappears.